Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy. Welcome to One to One. What would it be like to go to work every day and not be tied down to a computer and the same sterile office scenery? Instead, you're surrounded by some of the most beautiful artwork in the world: painting, sculpture, beautifully crafted furniture, ancient artifacts from all over the world, while your vistas change every few days or weeks. For 10 years, that was Patrick Bringley's job as a guard at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. As he struggled to overcome his grief over the death of his brother, he found that working amid beautiful things in the solitude of the Met galleries helped him heal. He went on to write a book about his experience as a museum guard in the book All the Beauty in the World, which became a bestseller. And recently, he made his debut as an actor in his play by the same name, which he hopes to bring to a theater in New York. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So your book, which came out last year, is now in its 10th printing, I understand. You just made your debut as an actor, starting in your play based on the book. Is your head spinning?
A little bit. Yeah, it's been a wild ride. It's been a fun year and change.
Why do you think so many people have been intrigued by your story?
Yeah, I think off the bat, it's an interesting tale for people, an interesting sort of hook. What would it be like to be a guard in this 2.5 million square foot museum, going there each and every day, as you said, and seeing all these beautiful things? And I think it's a bit of wish fulfillment, a bit of an escape for some people to imagine that, going into a place where, as a guard, you have your hands empty and you have your head up and you have this sort of time and space to look around and see the beautiful things. So I think that off the bat is appealing to people. And then it's also that people are intrigued by the workings of that museum, the backstage. There are almost 500 guards work in that place. So I think that's the initial sort of draw.
So how did you wind up at the Met?
So when I was 22 years old, I had got a job at the New Yorker magazine. And of course, that felt like that was head spinning in its own way. Because I
Center of the world,
exactly,
center of the literary world.
Exactly. I was at a skyscraper at 42nd Street and Broadway, and I thought that was the center of the world. And I thought, you know, having an @newyorker.com email address, this was something that was, you know, very, very impressive. But it's somewhat dangerous at 22 years old, I think, to be impressed with your situation and yourself. And I wasn't writing for the magazine. You know, I had a job in the events department. And what would I have written? I hadn't thought an original thought in my life yet. I was just a kid. But while I was there, kind of feeling glamorous, my big brother got sick. And he had what's called a soft tissue sarcoma, which is a rare type of cancer. And he got very sick, and all of a sudden I was spending, you know, less time in that skyscraper and more time in rooms at Beth Israel Hospital and Tom's apartment in Queens. And it was very clear that kind of momentous things were going on in those little quiet spaces. And it felt just as clear that the kind of, you know, buzzy nonsense of the Condé Nast building, office politics and corporate ladder climbing and things like that, felt like nonsense, you know, felt less important. And I kind of grew allergic to it. And when my brother died, I didn't want to just race back to some office job and worry about that same sort of thing. I think I kind of felt speechless. I wanted to stand still a while. And I found this opportunity to stand still professionally in the most beautiful place that I could think of. And I think something about standing at old master galleries, or something standing around in these kind of sacred spaces there at the Met, was reminiscent in a beautiful way of those quiet little rooms. And I was very grateful to remain in that kind of atmosphere.
I have, I think, 3 friends or former acquaintances who worked at guards at the Met. I never really talked to them about their work, but the guards are kind of mysterious. You do sort of wonder, you know, about them, where they came from, what they're thinking. Now, you started there in 2008. What was it like in the beginning? What was it like beginning your work there?
Sure. So I got assigned a home section, which was the old master paintings. So every day for 4 months, I was posted inside those galleries. I had training, classroom training, and then I showed up to work and I got fitted in my dark polyester blue suits, and I had to trail another guard to sort of learn the ropes from her. This, I call her Ada in this book, this very, very colorful woman from Finland. And she taught me the ropes of the place and, you know, how it works, what to do when people are trying to touch, what to do when you're asking questions and you're learning your way around the place, because of course you're giving directions, and what to do in case of emergencies and the numbers you call for the command center and everything like that. But then, you know, you learn on the job that all of those things, they just take minutes. You know, this telling person not to climb a statue and things like that. And then there are these hours where you are just nearly invisible, kind of standing back in your dark blue sort of camouflaging suit, and you're just watching the art, watching the people. One of the first words of advice I got as a guard from an old timer, they said, the way you work this job is when you get bored of watching the people, you look at the art. When you get bored of watching the art, it's back to the people. Which was wise counsel. And I think that's how I started.
Were there any rules of things you shouldn't do or things you should do?
Sure. I mean, the most important thing that you should do is be alive to your surroundings. So you shouldn't be stuck to a phone, of course. You shouldn't even have your phone on. And you shouldn't be closed off. You know, you shouldn't be just staring vacantly, you know, thinking a looping little thought that makes it so you're not aware of your surroundings. Because that's the main thing that you're doing. You're sort of a watchman, making sure that all is well in sort of an old kind of, I don't know, it's old-fashioned sense.
And how long were your shifts? And how long would you be in a particular section of the museum?
So I worked what's called a third platoon schedule, where I worked 2 8-hour days, 2 12-hour days. So that's 40 hours, and then I had 3 days off, although lots of people work overtime on their days that they have off. And you would be on a team that would rotate among 3 posts. So you'd be in just one section. But then when you showed up the next day at work, after I passed probation, after my first 4 months, and I wasn't just in the old masters every day, you'd show up to work and you'd get changed into that suit in the locker room, and you go to the dispatch office, and they might say, you know, Bringley, Section H, which meant you were in Egypt that day, or Section F, Asia, or, you know, I, Islamic. And then you would have 8 or 12 hours to just absorb that. And I was cycled all through the building. I worked, you know, over my first couple of years probably, I worked every post and every wing of that building. And it's a marvelous way to get to know it, that's for sure.
My sense is that the Met is just huge, and that there are probably rooms that you got to go into that we aren't even aware of.
I mean, people miss things. People always miss things. I can't tell you how many times you hear people say, I've been to this museum 30 times over the course of 30, 40 years, and I feel like I've never been in these galleries. Because the wonderful thing about the Met is it's not actually one building. It's a bunch of buildings that have been built over the span of 150 years and kind of smashed together. So there's lots of funny nooks and crannies, lots of funny ways that the buildings connect with one another, lots of different atmospheres in all the different places. There's not one feeling to the Met because, you know, the Chinese Ming Dynasty Scholars Garden feels entirely different than the 19th century galleries where there's a buzz because everyone's seeing the Van Goghs.
Is there also an underground to the Met?
So the important thing to know when you're walking through the Met, so the footprint of the Met is on 12 acres of Central Park. It's just an enormous building, and it's mostly on 2 floors. But as you walk through those 2 floors, you have to imagine that as big as it is where you're watching, it's just as big below your feet.
Yeah.
And when I would come in the morning, you know, I would go past the Sentry booth and I would boop in my credentials, and you walk down there and you're passing, you know, storage facilities and conservation studios. There's a wood shop, there's a plexiglass shop, there's an armory with a working forge, and all
There's the whole city underneath the exhibit spaces.
And there are signs everywhere in bright yellow that say yield to art in transit, because art's coming by on crates and hand carts, and you have to stand aside like those things are ambulances.
The 500 or so guards, who are they? Where are they from? What are
They
they
are
like?
from New York City, but by way of everything, everything. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about being a guard at the Met, I think, is that the collection of people that you work with is a more or less random group of New Yorkers, because one type of person doesn't set out in life to become a museum guard. It's all different types of people who have all done different things, especially since so many of them are from different countries. I mean, 40% of New York City is foreign-born. I'd guess 50 or 60% of the guards are foreign-born.
Yeah.
And, you know, they had been kindergarten teachers and cops and reporters and lawyers and, you know, commercial airline pilots and cab drivers and just everything that you can imagine. And it creates this incredible richness in who they are as a group of people, and then also this amazing kind of richness in how they relate to this great world collection, because in some ways they are themselves, you know, representative of the world.
Does it become a kind of fraternity of guards, or is it more like, you know, I made friends here, made friends there? Is it this sort of...
I liked working in a place, I mean, it's one of the reasons I like New York City. I like when you feel like you can't get to the bottom of something, like this sort of endless sort of quality, inexhaustible sort of quality. And as a workplace, it's like that, because you can't know 500 people. Even on a given day, you know, almost 300 guards are on post, and you can't even know all of them. So you constantly are put next to somebody where you say, I've seen you around 100 times. You know, what's your name? And you say, oh, I'm Sheryl. And then all of a sudden you're having this conversation because maybe you're posted on checkpoints when people come in and you're standing right near each other, and you can have sort of a conversation over the course of an 8-hour day. And all of a sudden I get your entire life story and you get my entire life story, when all we had done before was just kind of nod at each other. And I wouldn't say there's like a huge fraternity, because there's too many.
Yeah.
But there's this wonderful thing that the ice is automatically broken, because we are wearing the same suit and we are doing the same job. So there's not any sort of hierarchy. There's not like a feeling like, oh, you shouldn't talk to them, they're, you know, they're the boss or something, which I just found magical.
The Met, I understand, gets something like 7 million visitors in the course of a year. And I'm just wondering if the visitors to the Met are better behaved or about the same as annoying as the public in other places.
For the most part, people are lovely, you know? I mean, the thing is, on the busiest days of the year, like around Christmas time when we're shooting, you know, maybe 30,000 people will be in there. And if you get a few screwballs here and there, you have to realize by the numbers, you know, 99.9% of people are very, very lovely. And they know the rules, and they know they're not meant to touch the art. But you do get all kinds of people in the Met. And you get lots of people who have never been to the Met before, and maybe never been to any big city art museum before. And they just don't know what this place is. And they don't know the rules. And they don't know that that stuff's real. You know, people will start putting their hands on an ancient statue, and you'll tell them, you know, that thing's 2,600 years old. And they go, oh, you know, they just hadn't thought about this before, and they don't know how to relate to this place before. And those people often are the ones who end up having fun conversations with you, the guard, because they don't know what's what, and they don't have their bearings, and they're looking around for someone to help them find their bearings. And I always like those people with those kind of wide eyes that would remind me that I should have wide eyes in that place too, because it's my feeling about that place that none of us, even the most educated, really have our bearings walking into a place that big, filled with so much.
Any difficult incidents with visitors that you can recall?
Oh yeah, many. I mean, I had, you know, a guy who was getting too close in this very busy Picasso museum, and I gestured for him to get far, and he didn't quite understand what I was saying, and he sort of took the inside track. There's a big group of people looking at the Picassos, and they're the Picassos, and he took the inside track between them and threw his shoulder into Picasso's Woman in White, which sort of swung on its copper cords like that, ended up being fine. I had a young man try to climb an ancient Venus statue and sit in her lap, and I stopped him. I stopped him, and he was very polite about it. Like I was saying before, he just didn't know the rules. But he looked at her, and she had, missing arms and a missing head. And he looked all around this Roman court, which is this sort of, battlefield of mangled statues. And he said, so all this broken stuff, it broke in here? So we got to look out for things like that.
What were some of your favorite galleries or pieces of art that particularly spoke to you?
So I loved, it was just pure happenstance that I was put in the old master galleries as my first home section. But I loved being there. I loved being in these galleries. Some people, they look at these paintings from the 14th century, say, and they feel, oh, these are old-fashioned. What do they have to say to me? This is old, fusty kind of stuff. Whereas I could be in these galleries full of adoration paintings and lamentation paintings and the passion of Christ, and that were painted in a time of plague where maybe a third of Europe died. And it was clear to me that the emotion in these paintings were so close to the surface that these people were marveling over the human story, over the poignancy of it, over the beauty of it, but also the fragility of it. And having just been through an experience where I felt like, I was sitting by bedsides for a couple of years, and you see exactly that, the poignancy of the human drama and the beauty of it and the fragility of it and the love and the pain. And I felt like these paintings, these sort of sadly luminous old master paintings, I just understood them. I felt a connection to them. I felt sort of privileged to bear witness to their beauty and their pain, the adoration and the lamentation in rooms like that.
You write about, quote, the freedom that comes with being able to think your thoughts.
Oh, yes. I mean, I very much miss the job because, now I am mostly a conventional person who's, getting things done and advancing projects, and I'm trying to write something new, and I'm answering emails and promoting the book and going giving talks, and, all these things that just boom, 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 boom. They move you along a narrow, forward-moving path. Whereas a guard, for 2,000 days, I got nothing done. Like, that was the job. The job was to show up and not be on the forward marching parade, to be standing to the side of it, watching everyone else who is busy and has things to do, watching the curators zip by you into their office, whereas you just have all the time in the world to think your thoughts and to look and to contemplate and to chat and to just, and you feel so human, you feel so free. You feel like you have the time to develop original thoughts too. Because if you're moving along that sort of narrow path, I think all you can do is kind of think in this sort of conventional straight ahead manner.
Right.
And
got to get this done, got to do that.
Exactly. Whereas I had the time to think to the left and the right and backwards and forwards and up and down. And I think to the extent to which I came up with interesting things to say about art, it was all because I had the ability to think, in a zigzag.
How did being in the presence of all this artwork, how did it help you heal from the grief you felt about your brother's death?
I mean, I don't think it's ever straightforward. It's not like I can say in sort of a self-help kind of way, that these are the steps. I just know that for me, it was extremely important to have time and have space and not feel as if I had to be pretending to care about nonsense at work that I didn't really care about. I mean, the same way that I think that some people would find solace walking through the woods or sitting in a church or being in a quiet space, I just felt so grateful to have that time and to have that honesty, to feel like I was just doing something honest where I could train my thoughts on things that seemed to matter. This art that's about life and death and suffering and everything else. These people who have come into the gallery and are here to spend an afternoon seeing things that are beautiful and important and old, and to remember how big the world is and full and majestic. I mean, just all of those things felt real to me. And I think that it was important for me to be among them. But then it was also important for me, and this is part of kind of the narrative arc of my book, to move out of that. I needed a period where I was just being still and quiet, but I also needed eventually to get through that. And I was able to do that through people, through talking to people, and eventually making friendships and lasting friendships with a bunch of my fellow guards, all of which sort of brought me back into rhythm with the world, and eventually over a long period kind of got me ready to, I don't know, get back into the world in a way.
What made you decide to write the book?
I mean, I've always written. I've always been someone since I was a little kid who's written poetry and sort of filled up notebooks. And when I started as guard, I had no idea I would write a book, but I did think maybe I'd write something. So I would keep a notebook in my pocket, and I would keep note of funny things I overheard and of, you know, interesting things that I noticed about an artwork or something. And maybe I'd try to write a art review from a guard's perspective, something like that. About 6 or 7 years into the job, I got the idea to write a book, but my first idea was to write a guard's guide to the Met. That's what I was calling it. And it would be, you know, a bunch of information about the art, but sprinkled through things about the backstage. And I tried that, and it was just sort of a mess. And eventually I realized, well, you know, the world has a lot of guidebooks, and it has a lot of, you know, anecdotes and factoids. But what there aren't a lot of books about is the experience of arts, what it feels like to be among this stuff, what draws people into a building like this in the first place, the sort of subjective, you know, first-person experience of this art. And it occurred to me eventually, well, I could try to write something about that. But in order to write something subjective, you have to talk about the subject. You have to talk about yourself. And I realized, oh my gosh, this is going to have to be a memoir. And then that made it so, I would have to write about my brother and about the experience that brought me in here. And I would have to learn how to write a little bit like a novelist and write in scenes and things like that. And it was all a sort of, by degrees, it got more ambitious that way.
Did you take any writing courses?
No. I mean, I guess back in college I took a little bit, but not really. I've never, just the same way that I'm not formally trained in art, I'm not formally trained as a writer. But I just wrote and wrote and wrote. Oh my God, I must have written, 500,000 words just filling up notebooks, sort of figuring out what the tone of the thing would be, and what my sort of approach to talking about art would be. Because I knew that I didn't want to use, any art historical terminology. I didn't want to be talking about chiaroscuro and things like that. I wanted to write something that would feel very relatable to any kind of solitary individual who would walk into a place like the Met and feel something that they maybe couldn't put words to.
There are a lot of people who want to be writers, and they go to places like the New Yorker, and they stay there, working their way up in a lot of menial kind of jobs until maybe they get to write a couple of paragraphs. I mean, it's sort of the hard way, and often the way it happens, becoming a writer. You sort of did it differently. In fact, getting out of the New Yorker and doing something completely different got you a book, a published book.
Yes, I did. I took a very roundabout, strange path, because just what you were describing is what I thought I would do. I thought, I'll figure out how to write, those unsigned book reviews, and then the talk of the town piece, and then, but the reality is, what did I have to say? And I wasn't terribly good at that too. I'm not terribly good at writing quickly and on assignment and things. So I don't know. It wasn't that I had some grand plan to do it like this, but I do think that in order to write, you got to figure out what it is you have to say. And if you want to write something like a memoir, then you got to go out and live because you have to write about what you did. So I'm very fortunate that somehow or another I skipped all those intervening steps and skipped right to writing the book, which was an extremely hard thing to do, but has been a wonderful experience.
Your play premiered last month in South Carolina during the Charleston Literary Festival. How did it go?
It went wonderfully. It was really fun. Yeah, it's a one, you know, first I had to memorize 80 minutes worth of lines. I mean, thankfully I wrote them, so that made it a little easier, but it didn't make it easy. And I had a wonderful director, and have, Dominic Dromgoole, who was the artistic director of the Globe Theatre in London for a long time. And he helped me shape it sort of visually, and we had wonderful works of art behind me as I spoke in this very wonderful set. And it went great. It was at a beautiful 500-seat theater there, and we packed it twice and got them on their feet. So we're hoping to get it off Broadway now.
How did you get a London director? How did you manage to do that?
The reason I debuted at the Charleston Literary Festival is it's just the best literary festival I've ever been to. It's just a wonderful, special place. And at the festival last year, where I was just invited to speak on stage, you know, an interview, I met him, because he was there talking about, it was the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's first folio. And we sort of hit it off, and I pitched the project to Charleston, and then I pitched it to him. And once he came on board, it really sort of upped the seriousness of this thing, because I was conceiving it at first of sort of a staged reading, you know, something small. And he's like, oh no, we're going to raise the money, and we're going to do this right and do it as a full production. And I'm very grateful to him.
It's a great story of how your book came to be, and how the play came to be, and how you got to where you are now. And I hope we'll get to see your play in New York.
Oh, thank you. I hope so too.
I'm afraid we're out of time. I'd like to thank Patrick Bringley, author of All the Beauty in the World and the star of a one-man play by the same name, for joining me today. To learn about our upcoming shows, you can follow us on Instagram at one-to-one CUNY TV, and you can watch us on the go by downloading the CUNY TV app. For the City University of New York and One-to-One, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.